Walk through Providence's College Hill neighborhood, and the argument is made in brick and wood without a single word of explanation. Three-decker homes, those three-story wood frame buildings with one unit per floor and a porch on every level, line the streets in continuous density, their facades close to the sidewalk, their stacked porches creating the street activation that makes a neighborhood feel inhabited rather than just occupied. The same building type fills the working-class streets of Boston, Springfield, and New Haven. It defined Northeast urbanism for a century. It was invented in Worcester, Massachusetts. Drive to Worcester today, and you will not find it. Most of what Worcester built, Worcester demolished. The city that gave the industrial Northeast its defining residential form does not look like it belongs in the industrial Northeast. Worcester was incorporated as a town in 1722 and as a city in 1848. It is the second largest city in Massachusetts and the second largest city in New England after Boston. On September 6, 1774, 4,622 militiamen from 37 Worcester County towns lined both sides of Main Street and forced the British Crown's court officials to walk the gauntlet, hats removed, reciting their renunciations of British authority more than 30 times each, so that everyone along the line could hear. British authority vanished from Worcester County that day and never returned. This happened 7 months before Lexington and Concord. Most Americans have never heard of it. John Adams studied law in Worcester. The American Antiquarian Society, founded there in 1812, holds the largest collection of pre-1820 American printed materials in the world. The monkey wrench was invented there. So was the Valentine's Day card industry. The three-decker home was invented there and exported to every major Northeast city. Worcester had centuries of accumulated development, a pre-grid organic street network refined over 200 years of continuous settlement, and a manufacturing economy that made it one of the most productive mid-sized cities in New England. Most American cities that declined in the mid-20th century lost their economic base first and their physical fabric afterward. Worcester demolished its physical fabric while the economy was still operating, and then lost the economy anyway. The sequence is what makes it the opposite of every comparable city. Most cities had something to rebuild from. Worcester cleared the foundation before the collapse arrived. Worcester's street network was not a grid. This is worth establishing precisely because the grid is what most Americans understand as the default form of an American city. Phoenix, Houston, Chicago, Denver, the rational, scalable, automobile-compatible geometry that made continental expansion legible and replicable. Worcester predated the grid as a planning concept. Its streets evolved from colonial-era settlement patterns, following the actual terrain of central Massachusetts rather than imposing a predetermined geometry on top of it. The result was narrow streets, irregular block shapes, buildings that met the sidewalk at angles grids cannot produce, and the kind of density through texture that only organic development over long time periods creates. That pre-grid street network produced a specific problem and a specific solution. The problem was that Worcester's narrow, irregular lots could not efficiently accommodate the conventional row house forms being built in cities with wider grid parcels. The solution was the three-decker, a three-story wood frame residential building with one independent unit per floor, front porches on each level, providing the street activation the building's density required, and a narrow footprint designed for exactly the kind of irregular urban lots that Worcester's organic streets created. It was a housing innovation born from the specific physical constraints of one city's street network. Worcester built thousands of them. The building type then spread across the Northeast, filling Providence's Federal Hill, Boston's Dorchester and Jamaica Plain, Springfield's South End, New Haven's Dwight and Westville neighborhoods, where it became the structural basis of working-class urban life for the entire first half of the 20th century. The cities that received the three-decker preserved it. Their three-decker neighborhoods are now among the most sought-after urban residential addresses in New England. Their density and walkability and street activation commanding premiums that would have surprised the mill workers they were built to house. Worcester demolished most of its own three-decker stock in the urban renewal programs of the 1950s and the 1960s. The building type the city invented and exported now defines the urban character of every major New England city except the one that created it. On September 6th, 1774, in a town of roughly 250 permanent residents, nearly 5,000 militiamen from across Worcester County assembled on Main Street. They had come to close the royal courts before the Crown-appointed judges could open a new session under the Massachusetts Government Act. It was the British Parliament's response to the Boston Tea Party, which suspended colonial self-governance and placed the province under military rule. The officials arrived and were forced to resign. They were then made to walk the gauntlet of militiamen, hats in hand, reciting their renunciations of British authority aloud, more than 30 times each as they moved through the crowd. No shots were fired, no blood was shed. British authority in Worcester County ended that morning and did not return. This event preceded Lexington and Concord by 7 months. Historians who have studied the 1774 Massachusetts resistance movement argue that what happened in Worcester and in similar courthouse confrontations across rural Massachusetts in the same period was the actual transfer of political authority from the Crown to the people, and that the fighting the following April was the British attempt to reclaim authority it had already lost. When General Gage dispatched spies in the spring of 1775 to identify where to strike, they reported that Worcester was too well armed and too well organized to attack. He went to Concord instead. The war started there. The Revolution, as a matter of political fact, had already happened in Worcester. Concord has a monument and a national historical park. Lexington has the Minuteman statue and an entire tourism economy built around April 19th. Worcester has a surface parking lot on the site where 4,622 militiamen stood on the morning that British authority in Massachusetts effectively ended. The buildings that stood along that stretch of Main Street in 1774 are gone. The physical context that would make the event legible to a visitor does not exist. Boston preserved Faneuil Hall and built a Freedom Trail, and turned its revolutionary heritage into one of the most visited urban tourism destinations in America. Worcester demolished the physical environment of an equally foundational history and became, in the national imagination, an anonymous, mid-sized Massachusetts city that most Americans cannot accurately locate on a map. The Worcester Center Galleria opened in 1971. To build it, the city cleared 34 acres between Worcester Common and Washington Square. 86 buildings were demolished. About 50 feet of the easternmost edge of the common itself was removed. 170 graves were dug up. The cleared land was replaced with an enclosed shopping mall of approximately 1 million square feet, surrounded by the surface parking lots that the preceding urban renewal clearances had already created across the downtown perimeter. Interstate 290, which had been routed directly through the center of the city, was completed in 1970, the year before the Galleria opened. Worcester's Union Station, which had been the hub of the city's rail connections for decades, closed to passengers by 1974, 3 years after the mall opened. The Galleria's internal logic was the same logic that produced every enclosed downtown shopping mall in America during the same period, that pedestrian retail needed to be climate-controlled and parking accessible to compete with the suburban malls drawing shoppers away from city centers. Worcester built the product. Then it discovered that suburban residents who drove to the Galleria could drive the same distance or less to the actual suburban malls in Shrewsbury, Millbury, and Natick, which offered a larger selection, more parking, and the identical enclosed retail experience without the friction of navigating downtown streets. The Galleria declined through the 1980s, lost its anchor tenants, and was eventually demolished in 2010. The city square development that replaced it has attempted to reconnect some of the historic street patterns the Galleria severed. The streets it is reconnecting led to the 86 buildings that were demolished to build the thing being replaced. Most American cities that built downtown malls in the 1970s built them on land that had already lost its commercial vitality, vacant parcels, derelict industrial sites, blocks where the economics of private investment had already failed. Worcester built the Galleria on land that contained the organic, historic commercial fabric of its downtown core. The blocks cleared for it were not blighted in any structural sense. They were functioning urban blocks that had been functioning since the 18th century. The Worcester Galleria did not replace a failed downtown, it created one. In the 1990s, Worcester's economy began recovering through healthcare, higher education, and immigration. The University of Massachusetts Medical School, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, Clark University, and the College of the Holy Cross together make Worcester one of the most institutionally dense, smaller cities in New England. University of Massachusetts Memorial Medical Center employs approximately 14,000 workers. The population, which had fallen from a peak of roughly 203,000 in 1950 to approximately 161,000 by 1980, has recovered to over 210,000, making Worcester the second largest city in Massachusetts and the second largest in New England. By the metrics of demographic and economic recovery, Worcester is a 21st century success story. The recovery has arrived in the physical form least suited to the city's foundational character. New residential construction in the downtown core is generic contemporary, undifferentiated towers and mid-rise blocks that carry no reference to the pre-renewal fabric they are replacing and could be built in any American city of any age. Providence's recovery was anchored by the preserved Victorian streetscapes of College Hill and Benefit Street, which provided the aesthetic identity that attracted the restaurants, galleries, and residential investment that drove the broader revival. Portland, Maine leveraged its intact Victorian Old Port district into a cultural and economic identity that now defines the city nationally. Both cities had something to build their recoveries around. Worcester's urban renewal program was comprehensive enough that it eliminated not just individual buildings, but the connective tissue between surviving historic structures, the continuous street frontages, the varied block patterns, the layered architectural fabric that makes historic districts function as environments rather than collections of isolated monuments. Polar Park opened in 2021 as the home of the Worcester Red Sox AAA affiliate, and it has catalyzed new residential and commercial development in the Canal District. New buildings are going up. Streets are being reconfigured to more closely match their historic alignments. The recovery is real. It is just happening on cleared land with new construction, filling the space the urban renewal left without restoring what the urban renewal took. Most cities that feature in conversations about mid-century urban destruction lost their historic fabric as a consequence of economic decline. The population left, the tax base contracted, the buildings deteriorated, and the clearance came in to address the physical symptoms of an economic disease that had already taken hold. Detroit's historic neighborhoods emptied because the auto industry contracted. Baltimore's row house vacancies followed the closure of Sparrows Point. The demolition followed the decline. Worcester ran the sequence in reverse. The urban renewal program that demolished 86 buildings for the Galleria site alone, that routed Interstate 290 through the center of the city, permanently dividing its street network, that cleared block after block of the pre-grid commercial fabric for surface parking. And this happened while Worcester was still a functioning industrial city. The manufacturing economy that had driven the city's growth was contracting but had not collapsed. The historic fabric that was demolished was not derelict, it was old and dense. And the people making the decisions in the 1950s and 1960s had been convinced by a planning ideology that old and dense were problems to be solved rather than assets to be preserved. Providence lost its waterfront to a highway and spent $600 million getting it back. Hartford lost its waterfront to a federal interstate it cannot touch. Pittsburgh lost its steel industry and rebuilt around the university and healthcare anchors that its geography had always preserved, in a physical landscape that the valleys and hills had made too difficult to comprehensively demolish. Worcester lost something none of those cities lost in the same way. It lost the physical proof of what it had been, the pre-grid street network that made it distinctive, the three-decker stock it had invented, the classical commercial fabric that made its downtown one of the finest in New England, before any of those things could serve as the foundation for the recovery that arrived anyway. The militiamen who lined Main Street on September 6, 1774, forced British officials to walk a gauntlet and recite their renunciations until everyone could hear. The buildings they stood in front of are gone. The street they lined has been widened for automobile traffic. The city whose patriots ended British authority in Massachusetts 7 months before Lexington and Concord is now best known, to the extent it is known at all, as the city with a minor league baseball team and a good hospital. Worcester did not lose its history, it demolished it, and the difference between those two things is the entire argument.